Let's see, we had 2 listener questions come through, or viewer questions, depending on your medium. What were they?
Yeah, let me pull them up quickly. All right, so 2 listener questions here. First one was, do aerodynamics matter in long distance running? And the second one, I think Jared might have a good understanding of this one, is someone recently bought an Aura HRV ring to monitor recovery and readiness to train. They want to know if it's any good and what does the science say about it. So let's move on to this mysterious Aura HRV ring. Now, we're not talking about the Honda HRV here. We're talking about heart rate variability. So don't get it wrong there, guys. Bazza, what do you know about this HRV ring they talk about?
Well, before the listener question, I actually knew nothing about it. So it was really nice to have a listener question come in to allow me to go and learn about some new technology, which is really nice. It's kind of one of the nice things about this podcast. So the Aura ring is simply a ring. It's a small piece of technology that you wear as you would any other ring. And it is capable of informing on heart rate variability and your level of heart rate. So this particular Aura ring uses photoplethysmography. So it's basically measuring the pulse rate of your blood in your capillaries. So much the same technology as you would have seen on medical shows on the television, where you have the sort of the pulse oximeter on the end of the finger, the white clip that goes over the end of the finger and measures oxygen saturation. This ring isn't measuring oxygen saturation, but it's using the same technology to look at the flow of blood in the very tiny capillaries. And so by measuring that flow of blood, it can measure your heart rate, basically.
Can I just jump in there for anyone who might be a bit kind of behind on how this technology works? You've actually all done it, and so Myo and photoplethysmography works in kind of the same way, in that you remember when you were a kid and you had a torch and you put your torch up against your hand and it would kind of go red and you could shine it through to the other side and you'd be like, oh, it's weird, my hand's gone red. And it's kind of the same thing. Like you can, when you put that light onto that area, then you can determine the flow. And of course, the flow is linked to the heart, because the heart is the thing that's projecting that blood around. Is that correct, Baz?
Perfect, mate. Thank you very much.
So, Jared and Warnie, is it technology similar to what we get in our GPS watches nowadays, where they measure heart rate?
Yep. So basically, our smart watches that have the little the same piece of technology on the underside of them. So you would have seen that in pretty much most smart watches these days, or some of your Garmin watches, or other watches, or wrist one. There you go. Sando's got one there. So that's basically the same technology, photoplethysmography.
Is that an Apple 6? Geez, you're rolling, man. Rolling in it.
Don't tell anyone.
And so, yeah, that technology is becoming more and more popular with smartwatches and technology alike. But this particular Aura ring is using the technology to measure heart rate, and it's also using the technology to measure heart rate variability. So I've done a little bit of research on the Aura ring today, just to sort of firstly look at the technology, to see if anyone has done any sort of third-party evaluating of the validity or reliability of the technology, but I've also done a bit of background reading on heart rate variability to sort of just double check the metrics that this Aura ring is reporting, to see if they're the metrics that we can be confident in.
So Jared, quickly,
yep.
What is heart rate variability?
Good question. Heart rate variability is looking at the variability or the variance in your heart rate from beat to beat. So I'll try and do a bit of an example. So at rest, we're sitting here, on average, our heart rate is at 60 beats per minute. Okay, so that's the average, right? But that would be the average over 5 seconds, over 15 seconds, over 30 seconds, over 60 seconds. And so what you're doing is you're taking all of those beats and you're averaging them to one number. Heart rate variability is looking at the change between every successive beat. Okay, so the change might be 60, 61, 63, 65, 62, 60, 61, 65, 64, 70, 81, 60. Okay, and so what heart rate variability is looking at the actual change between consecutive beats. So
Jared, why is that important?
So that's important because it can indicate on our central nervous system and any level of fatigue that we might be experiencing. So our heart rate is, well, first and foremost, our heart rate is set by the pacemaker cells within the heart. So the heart is able to pump along on its own. It doesn't need any sort of external input from anything. So that's first and foremost, but then it's under really tight regulation from the central nervous system, and specifically the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is the branch of the central nervous system that is not under our conscious control. So we can't think about our heart rate and make it go faster. We can think about things that make us excited, but we can't think about our heart and make it go faster. So it's not under our conscious control. And the autonomic nervous system is broken down into two branches, the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. And these are the two branches that you might have heard of, either rest and digest system or the fight and flight system. Okay, so the parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for resting and digesting and relaxing and recovering and making all of these processes lower and slower. And our sympathetic nervous system is responsible for making us fight or making us run away. So it's responsible in getting all of our systems upregulated to get us moving faster. So Sandon's question is, why is this important? Well, the heart rate can tell us, and especially the variability in our heart rate can tell us how much of which of those parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system are enacting on the heart. And so to try and summarize a really, really huge piece of research and a huge topic of research, the more parasympathetic nervous control we are under, the more rested we are. Okay, so if we're experiencing high levels of parasympathetic activity, it means we're rested, we're relaxed, and we're not experiencing lots of fatigue. If we're experiencing a lot of sympathetic nervous system activity, it means that we're likely stressed, or we're in a state of fatigue, or that we're recovering from something that's been really, really intense. And so heart rate variability is a really good way of looking at whether we're under parasympathetic nervous system activity or sympathetic nervous system activity. And this is a really coarse way of describing this. There's obviously a lot of really finer details to it, but just as a concept. And when we're under parasympathetic nervous system activity, our heart rate fluctuates quite a lot, which kind of sounds counterintuitive, because we're rested and we're relaxed. But when we're under parasympathetic nervous activity and when we're rested and when we're feeling really good and we're not experiencing fatigue, our heart rate is actually quite varied at rest. And so it might go, it might be 60, 70, 55, and it bounces up and down. And so you can see by that quick example that, the heart rate fluctuates really high. Okay, and so there's a lot of variability in our heart rate. And so heart rate variability is basically put together a bunch of equations or analysis methods to determine how much variability there is in our heart rate at rest. And so that's kind of my way of saying, the greater the heart rate variability, the more rested we are, the less heart rate variability there is, the more fatigued we are. And that's basically what heart rate variability is trying to tell us. And that's what's important about heart rate variability, and that's why we have the Oura Ring. So
I love this succinct explanation.
I hope that worked. So the Oura Ring uses technology that we've spoken about to measure our heart rate. And if you can measure your heart rate, you can measure heart rate variability, or specifically you can measure the changes in beat to beat. Okay, so from one beat to the next. Now what the Oura Ring does is it has two modes. It measures you over nighttime, so it can measure your sleep patterns, but it can also measure your heart rate, your resting heart rate, and your heart rate variability overnight, and it does that in 5-minute sections. Or you can also connect it to an app while you're sitting there and say do a test, and it collects 5 minutes worth of heart rate data. Now when we're measuring heart rate variability. 5 minutes is typically pretty well reported. I mean, that's a good amount of time to be analyzing heart rate variability. So that's a good thing for Aura. They're using 5-minute blocks of heart rate of beat to beat data, which is a good. That's a thumbs up tick for Aura. There are numerous different analysis methods of heart rate variability, as in, like, there are more than a dozen ways to analyze heart rate variability. But there's one particular method that's pretty well reported, that's pretty well, I guess, liked in the sports science literature, and that's looking at the natural log or the normal RMSSD, which is a good measure of overall heart rate variability, with a larger number of RMSSD in milliseconds, typically representing an increased heart rate variability and an improved health. RMSSD is the square root of the mean squared differences of successive RR intervals. So basically, it's looking at how much does the heart rate change from beat to beat. And so this is one particular measure of heart rate variability that is well reported. So another tick, 5 minutes, and calculating RMSSD, which is the square root of the mean squared differences of successive heart rate beats. So there's another tick, which is really good. So we're happy with that. So far so good. The technology is good, and the type of heart rate variability measure that it's reporting is good. So I tried to find some science or some scientific evidence for its use, which I was able to do. So I was able to find one third-party analysis or evaluation looking at the Aura Ring against other measures of heart rate variability or other over-the-counter sort of consumer products. And the Aura Ring reported reasonably valid estimates of RMSSD or heart rate variability from its photoplasmography technology. And so that was a paper by Stone and colleagues, 2021. So they looked at 5 different products, and they looked at how reliable the measures of heart rate variability were over 4 trials. And they compared that to an ECG recording, and ECG is the gold standard. And Aura was really good in terms of mean absolute percentage error. It was less than 8%, which is pretty good. And its Bland-Altman plot bias was just about -2 milliseconds, so it was pretty close to the ECG in terms of those sort of reliability and validity statistics, which is really good.
But Baz, the question I have, which I think would be a lot of listeners, what's the practical kind of takeaway from that though? Like,
Yep.
So what if I know that my heart rate variability is high or not? What does that mean?
Awesome question. So when we're looking at our training load, we've talked extensively about measuring training load, and we've talked extensively about trying to predict injury. But what we haven't looked at is sort of measuring training load and our response to training load in terms of our next training session, and how, I guess, physiologically ready we are for our next performance, or physiologically ready we are for our next training session. And this I guess this concept of being ready for the next session is termed readiness to perform. And so internal measures like this, heart rate variability, and other measures of heart rate like heart rate on kinetics or heart rate recovery rate, can indicate our readiness to perform, or they can indicate on our body, our central nervous system, our muscles, our I guess our readiness as a person, as a human, as an athlete, to perform at our best for our next effort. And so by understanding, Warnie, if our heart rate variability is high or if our heart rate variability is low, it can give us a good indication of how prepared we are for our best effort performance for the next session. And so if we're taking, daily measures of heart rate variability, and we're noticing that our heart rate variability is getting lower, and that's sort of coupled with an increase in training load. Maybe you're training for a marathon and you've upped your training load by sort of 10Ks this week and 10Ks the next week, and you're noticing that your heart rate variability is coming down, it's probably indicating that you're entering levels of fatigue, which you might want to sort of look at potentially not deloading, but maybe just, I guess,
Having a lighter week, or
having a lighter week or having a lighter session. Yeah, just trying.
Is this personal, mate? Have you been looking at my Strava? You've been noticing it actually gone up 10Ks every week.
No, it was just a guess on sort of standard linear periodization, but so yeah, that's why it's important. That's why we want to know about our heart rate variability, because it can indicate on our readiness to perform and how ready we are for our next training session.
and you can link that into how well someone's recovered after the last session, obviously.
Definitely, yeah, for sure.
So to answer this listener question, it's a good measure of heart rate variability.
Yep.
And the science sort of backs that up.
Yeah.
I just had a question about that research.
Yep.
What were the other, I guess, products that they compared it to?
Stone and colleagues, 2021, were using 2 chest straps.
Yep.
They're using 1 wristwatch and 1 iPhone camera into the finger. I can't remember the names of the brands of the 2 chest straps, the wristwatch, and it was just an iPhone going into some heart rate variability app. But the Aura Ring was second on the list. I can put a link to that paper if we want to in our podcast.
How'd the iPhone stack up? Because you see those apps pretty often.
120% error.
Yeah, okay. We'll be asking Letsy's dog again whether we're ready to train.
Pretty much. Yeah.
So what about the wristwatch? You know, you see a lot of people rocking your Garmin's and your Apple Watches and that sort of thing, and monitoring their, you know, their training and things like that. How good are those?
A lot of the rating and a lot of the error rates came down to how much movement there is between the skin and the device. And those wristwatches, which sit here on the wrist, are prone to a lot of movement. So the accuracy is always determined on how well you can get the watch to stay still.
So and tighter the better.
Tighter the better, and especially for heart rate variability, you should be doing it at rest anyway. So you should be sitting still when you're doing your heart rate variability measurement to increase the accuracy of the heart rate variability measures. But yeah, basically it was looking at how well you can get the device to your skin, and that's it. I can't really remember specifically the watches in this paper, but a lot of my reading around this technology was, you know, it's prone to movement, and that movement increases error.
So that's a very important thing you said. Just on a kind of side note, watches, rings, optical sensors on your upper arm, notoriously unreliable. If when you're training, running, riding, rowing, footy, whatever, if you want heart rate, you need a strap.
Yeah.
Well, you need a strap. You can't be doing the optical sensors, which is what myophotoplethysmography is. Like, you have to be very still, and you have to have a high number of optical sensors, and most devices come with 1 or 3 sensors, and you're not at rest. You think about a watch, how much that thing moves, and so the gold standard is still a heart rate monitor.
An electrode,
short of a 12 lead ECG. It's an electrode across the chest.
I would say, you know, for your everyday athlete or runner or weekend warrior, if they're using an Aura Ring or a watch or something like that, there's still, you know, good measures for training loads and things like that. The main thing would be to be consistent with those. You know, don't chop and change between a polar, heart rate strap across your chest and then go to your Apple or your Garmin watch and think that you're going to get the same, readings. You've got to be more consistent with the types of devices you're using, which will, I guess, increase its reliability for the, what you're interpreting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a good point, Sando. These devices, this technology is only as good as the data collection that you put them through. So, for example, if you are using this Oura ring, it's important that you do it while you're at rest, or you're using it at night all the time, and you're comparing the same data collection versus the same data collection. You're not doing it during the daytime versus at nighttime, or a different device and a different device.
Or before or after a session, or
exactly. Yep. So it's really important that you get the data collection right, and then any comparisons that you are making are basically apples for apples, and you're not and that apples for apples comparison is a way of improving the reliability, which means you're improving the accuracy of the data that you're looking at.
And then if you're wanting to measure your recovery and readiness to train, you'll actually be better able to do that.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
For the listener, giving us this question, the main thing would be they're all fine to use, just be the most consistent with the time of day and the parameters around when you're gathering the information.
Yeah, there are some. Yeah. Sorry, Letsy.
That's all right. I was going to say, I think a nice way to finish off this discussion on Oura Ring is to sort of go back. So the listener mentioned that he'd already bought one, but if you're thinking about buying this or buying a heart rate based watch, would the cost of a Oura Ring, which I believe is around 380 Australian dollars, is that cost worth it when you can do this basically the same thing with a Garmin watch or an Apple Watch?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally up to the individual what they think their money is worth or what the technology is worth. My first note to this listener, was try and do some research before purchasing. Like you said, let's see, it's $380 purchase, and the potential is that we find out that the Oura Ring is no good, which we're not saying that at all. It turns out that the technology is good and the heart rate variability measure is good, but there are many different bits of technology that purport to report the same thing. So yeah, do your research. If you're looking and you're interested in using heart rate variability as a measure of your readiness to perform, make sure that it's going to measure RMSSD. Make sure that it's going to take 5-minute sections. Make sure that it can do it at rest and it's not asking you to do it during exercise or after exercise. So yeah, try and get those bits of the technology right before you buy it.
I think the takeaway would be to wrap up, look for information around its accuracy and reliability, so how well it does its thing day to day. And if you can't understand what you're looking at on PubMed or EBSCOhost or Google Scholar, you don't have to go there. There are really good websites like DC Rainmaker and Science, of Sport and things that analyze that stuff and digest it in a friendly way, and it's something we might look at in the future as well. Don't just buy in blindly and kind of believe what the consumer says. And short of that, buy yourself a Nova Scotia duck tolling retriever like Letsy has, and ask him when you're ready to go.
Yes.
And if you like wearing Rolex and